Welcome to ENside Politics, your weekly podcast on everything you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express-News. Joining me today is Bexar County government reporter Brooke Park and City Hall reporter Megan Rodriguez. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about what we consider some of the biggest controversies this year at City Hall and the Bexar County Courthouse. And I think it's fair to say that District 10 Councilman Mark White has been the Energizer Bunny of controversies in 2024. So let's jump right in.
Yeah, there's a lot with Councilman Mark White going on this year. So I think what's probably on people's minds most recently is kind of his role in the city losing out on about $20 million worth of state tax credits. There had been this project that was going to come up in his district that would have brought in about $26 million project. It would have brought in 85 units along Nacogdoches Road. Mm-hmm. And he really pushed back against it because he was hearing a lot of pushback from community members in the area, kind of typical for especially affordable housing complexes. Right. And so he rallied support among his council colleagues to say no to this project in favor of trying to put the money toward a different project somewhere else that he thought would maybe be a little more palatable. But as Mayor Nirenberg had kind of warned at that point, you're not guaranteed that you can get another project approved. And that's exactly what we saw happen. The city lost out on the funds. And
yeah, so I mean, the city had $20 million in housing tax credits for affordable housing projects. You don't use them, you could lose them. That's entirely possible, and that's exactly what happened. Exactly.
Yes, it was finalized just recently that we were not going to be getting that money, and so.
Do you know what happened? Like, why didn't San Antonio keep the money?
Yes. So basically what happened was the alternative project that was pitched, it was turned down because the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs said that it just didn't meet their financial feasibility requirements. And so there was an appeal process where there was like some pushback. Councilman White and District 6 Councilwoman Melissa Cabello-Haverda, who's running for mayor right now, had gone and kind of like tried to plead to the board saying like, can we please get this? But it didn't work out. And so, those dollars are now going outside of San Antonio, fully lost out. But so that was the most recent. But I think the thing
this transpired in November. It started in November. Right?
Yes. And then it all got kind of, it went to council in September is when it kind of like started. Then November, December, we see it all fall apart. Yes. So, but Mark White, I think throughout this whole year, what got him the most headlines was his DWI case. Mm-hmm. So he, I feel like a lot of us had deja vu when this happened last year. He was arrested.
District 10 councilman getting arrested for driving while intoxicated. Sounds familiar. We had the same thing with, it was a little different with Clayton Perry, who was Mark White's predecessor. And what made that different was there was a hit and run involved in Clayton Perry's case.
It was a much more egregious situation.
Exactly.
Yes.
Nothing close to that in Mark White's case, but kind of walk us through what happened.
Yes, absolutely. So Councilman Mark White was with Councilwoman Cabello-Haverda and a group that they will not identify. At first, it was kind of said that it was like a group of friends. And then later he mentioned on the ENside Politics podcast here a while back that it was actually like there was potentially a developer who was like trying to do a project in his district. So we're not really sure exactly.
Kind of an informal briefing on that project.
Yes.
That's kind of how it came off.
Yes. And so,
in other words,
and we
the
don't
story
know
kind
what
of changed.
Yes.
What he was doing at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was this dinner at El Mirasol, and then everyone or a few people like popped over next door for drinks also, kind of came back. Melissa Cabello-Haverda wasn't feeling well, so Mark White goes and drops her off, then goes back to the Thirsty Horse Saloon for more dancing and drinks and whatever with the group. And then around 11 p.m., he gets pulled over by Officer Devin McCroy, who said that he was speeding, switching lanes without using his signal. When he was in the car, smelled of alcohol, and his eyes were glassy, all the things you usually hear about in cases like this. But I think what kind of tripped up a lot of people was partly like Mark White's insistence that he wasn't drunk, that he really hadn't drank that much, and that he felt fine. And I mean, when you watch the videos by comparison of the two of them, like what people had in their mind of councilman driving drunk versus what we were seeing with Mark White, it did look a lot different. He was coherent, he was polite, he was I think by a lot of people's kind of layman's terms, like understanding, like did well during the testing that he did. But he did, the report did come back that he was over the limit just a little bit. And so,
I mean, I think it's probably worth pointing out that he told the officer on the scene that he'd had one beer at each place. So 3 beers total. That kind of, his story changed, I think, later in the encounter with the police officer?
Basically it started off with, he said, I had a drink or I had a beer or something like that. And then as they keep talking, he starts like recounting how many drinks. And I think it was like up to like 3 beers or something by the end of their conversation. And he just kept insisting that he was sober and that he could drive home. But if he really didn't want him to drive home, like he would like leave his car there kind of a thing. It was like, he was pretty insistent.
I think you mentioned, he would, because he was pulled over on a frontage road on, I believe it was northeast Loop 410, not too far from the airport, not too far from his home. I think at one point he even offered to walk home. He just said, let's just let me walk home and we'll be good. I'll come back and get the car tomorrow. I mean, I think it's the interesting thing about that video is, apart from his insistence that he's sober, he feels sober, the police officer, I think, and this is a little bit subjective, but it looked to me like he was really kind of struggling. It wasn't a clear-cut case. He was. He actually went over, and there was another officer who came by who just happened to be driving by and like stopped as like backup in case, like, because they'll do this sometimes. And so he was just waiting, and the officer who was arresting McCroy, he goes over and is like chatting with him of like, what do you think? Like kind of trying to get his second opinion. And this other officer, it's almost, the way I remember it, it was almost like, you're on your own, bro. Yes, he was not going to weigh in. You're going to have to decide this on your own. So he did. Yes. Totally. But like you mentioned, so he refused to take a breathalyzer in the field. So they got a court order, and they drew his blood, 2-3 hours later? A little bit, yes. And actually those blood results were actually kind of one of the things that, or the person who drew it was like in question for his defense attorneys. Basically, they appeared to be trying to poke holes in her credibility. And during the very like drawn out, like White, again, was arrested at the end of last year, but he didn't accept his plea deal until just recently. And so he had this case that was just like dragged on. It was partly because they were like waiting on the prosecutors to give more information on exactly who this woman was, and kind of like her name's Karen Rehm, who drew this, or she like analyzed the blood in Austin. Sorry, not the person who drew the blood, but the person who analyzed the blood. And they had concerns about like chemical anomalies, is what one of the defense attorneys said, like with past cases that she'd been in. We really don't know what they were concerned about because it never went to trial. He accepted a plea deal, and I mean, it's, he was a defense attorney. He was trying to mount a defense. We don't know how serious this was. It could have been that they were onto something substantial, but it could have just been trying to poke holes in the prosecution's case. Yes, exactly. So he accepted the plea deal last month, and it's interesting. It's actually, even though the case with Councilman Perry was much more egregious than this, like they actually ended up with like kind of a similar outcome. I mean, I will say he didn't plead guilty to the charge of a DWI or anything like that. He ended up pleading no contest to obstruction of a highway, which tends to be used for people who are like first-time offenders, who they don't want the stigma of having a DWI on their record. He ended up, whereas like Perry actually did like plead no contest to his charges of like a hit and run and the DWI. But a DWI, I mean, for a first timer, it is a misdemeanor. So yes, both are misdemeanors. Yes, correct. And but he ends up being fined about $850. Has to pay like $270 in court fees, not a whole lot. 48 hours of community service. He got 6 months of probation and deferred adjudication, which basically means that if he follows all the steps, he will have the charge dismissed. It's not like totally wiped, like everyone like still knows, but it's not. It's dismissed, and so.
the obstruction of highway, I feel like a lot of reporters kind of ears perked up when they heard that one because there had been some controversy with the DA's office of like misusing this like a few years ago. The Express News had
frequently.
Yes,
overusing it. Yeah,
and the Express News had an investigation that came out that kind of like put some light to this, and it caused the DA's office to actually change its like standards and make it to where it's a lot harder to be able to get it. It's basically you can't. It's not for people who are like overly intoxicated, like and people who have like gotten DWIs several times before. So Mark White fell within the standards of what was allowed to get obstruction of highway, though.
Right. But it didn't end there with Mark White. In terms of controversy, like I said, he's an overachiever. So what else?
Ethics complaint. Yeah, there was an ethics complaint.
Of course.
So he was reprimanded by the city's ethics board, which ruled in August that he had basically violated 3 parts of the city's ethics code, which he had basically reached out to Police Chief William McManus by phone, like text and phone call, trying to talk with him last spring because Mark White's wife's friend was concerned about her child being abused. It's a long chain that it got here with. But basically, yeah, this was like some texts that were going on between Mark White's wife and their friend, the wife of Martin Phipps.
Yeah. The backstory is that this Martin Phipps, Mark White used to, as an attorney, work with Martin Phipps.
Yes.
He no longer does. Unclear whether they had a falling out. Anyway, there's clearly some bad blood between them. Right. There is history. So Martin Phipps, very colorful figure, controversial in his own right. Was going through really kind of ugly custody fight with his ex-wife, soon to be ex-wife, I believe. And that's where this started. So he, for the first time in a long time, had overnight. He was keeping his children overnight in his King William home, and Martin Phipps' ex-spouse, texted Mark White's wife, who had done some appellate legal work in her divorce case. You're right; it gets really complicated.
Yes, there's a lot of details here.
saying that one of her children texted her from Martin Phipps's house, her father's house, that she was in danger. She didn't feel safe. So that's kind of where things started. And then how did pick it up from there?
Yes, and so
you had Mark White at a party, a fiesta party.
Yes, a fiesta party with Manny Pelaez. They end up kind of both of them talking about how they should take action. They end up making this phone call to the police chief and a text, but police were kind of already on the case. There were already folks who had arrived who didn't like the officers who were investigating it didn't find any injuries or anything with the child, and they. Like, according to the police report, they just didn't file any charges against Phipps in all of this. So the complaint was basically that he had kind of like overreached and misused his power to try to get more results from this situation. But it was something like the 3 things that he was found to have violated were basically in the ethics code were regarding like unfair advancement of private interests, asserting prestige of a council position to advance private interests, and using or requesting or allowing the city employees requesting or allowing the use of city employees for private purposes that aren't available to other members of the public. And, it's interesting. This isn't the only time that he called upon Chief McManus during his DWI situation. When he was in the back of the police car getting driven up, the arresting officer said in a hearing related to his, not related to his actual DWI charge, but related to his license when he was having his license suspended through all of this, that he basically was asking if he could speak to William McManus. He first, when I first asked him about it, denied this, said he didn't remember ever doing that. And then again, the story kind of changed later on Beautiful Politics. He talked about how he was just asking because he wanted to know what the next steps were in the situation. Like so he kind of owned up to it eventually that he had asked for McManus, but never spoke to him after that, according to him.
And the ethics problems with city council didn't end there, of course.
Yes, there is.
What's the latest complaint?
Yes, there is one other ethics complaint currently making its way through the process. District 2 Councilman Jalen McKee Rodriguez is the subject of this one. So there is a realtor who's unrelated actually to the situation at hand who filed this one. His name's Oscar Zepeda, who filed it. But basically, he filed it out of after reading reports from the Express News and KSAT. I mention our reports specifically because they were in the ethics complaint. They were copies of our articles were in the ethics complaint. But
at least we have readers.
But yes, so basically, Councilman McKee Rodriguez had misled Doggett Freightliner, which is a Converse-based company that works with they sell and repair big rig cabs. They wanted to build a new facility. They're outgrowing their one right now. They wanted to build a new one on the east side, right next to a neighborhood. The neighborhood is very frustrated and angry about it. The details get kind of complicated, but basically there were some zoning and annexation changes that needed to happen. McKee Rodriguez basically misled the Doggett Freightliner representative, Ken Brown, and told him, we're just going to delay this to another date. But then at the last second decides, actually, let's try to push through a vote that would have essentially changed up it would have annexed the property and changed the zoning to allow for retail, but it would have denied it would have denied a part of the changes that would have been required to allow Doggett Freightliner to have the purpose that they wanted, which was for their dealership. And so there's this big fight the day that it happened. Council members were obviously very confused about what was going on when it was happening, and they ended up kicking it. And actually, McKee Rodriguez and Doggett Freightliner, Ken Brown, they make up right away. They end up coming to a resolution. And
so Ken Brown, the lobbyist representing Doggett, they made up right away, but he was plenty steamed.
Oh, he was furious. He was very upset. He was very furious. He was so mad the day of. He was actually talking like he was never going to trust Councilman McKee Rodriguez again, but then ends up trusting him. They end up working things out.
He effectively said he straight up lied to us.
Yes, is essentially what the conversation was the day of. They've since kind of both backtracked that a bit. After the ethics complaint was filed, both of them have kind of been well, it was a last minute decision. And they both have kind of changed from the narratives that they had that day of, where it seemed pretty clear that he felt lied to. Where
they end up voting on that decision to annex it?
Yes.
The vote?
Yes. So they ended up coming back after it all kind of got delayed in October. They end up coming back later and saying, okay, we are actually going to move forward. You can have your your facility right next to this neighborhood, but there's these extended buffers and higher walls and basically more protections for the neighborhood.
But when McKee Rodriguez was trying to undercut.
Yes. When that's right. That day they did not vote on that. They kicked it to another meeting. The council seemed to be actually going and siding with McKee Rodriguez at first until they all started realizing what was going on. When they realized that Ken Brown had been misled, they were okay, actually, we want to wait on this for another day.
We're good.
Yes. So that's moving its way through. The ethics complaint is in the hands of basically the way the order of these go is a third-party attorney has to rule on okay, is this going to even be worthy of the ethics board's review of it? And the third party attorney said, actually, they should take a look, and it should be in their hands. And so there's a panel of a few members of the ethics board that are reviewing it now. And then sometime next year, we're not sure the timeline exactly right now, they're going to make a recommendation to the rest of the board, and we'll kind of see how things play out.
Do you think it'll be early in the year, or you've got an election coming up in May, so my guess is they want to get that taken care of.
It'll probably be pretty quick because they have like a time limit of like how long they can take with this. So yes, I think the only delay right now is really because the holiday season, when all of this has happened. Like that seems to be what's like gunking up people's schedules right now, because it was moving pretty quickly before of like the process of like the responses going back and forth and everything. We're moving pretty quickly.
Okay, great. All right, let's move to the Bexar County Courthouse for a bit. Brooke, you did an excellent story about a month ago on abstentions, which doesn't seem like it should be that big a deal. It shouldn't be controversial. These are elected officials who, for whatever reason, opt not to vote on any given item. Kind of walk us through what you found.
Yeah, so this story kind of first interested me whenever I realized that Precinct 4 Commissioner Tommy Calvert had abstained on 3 of probably the most controversial votes of the last 4 months on Commissioner's Court. That was the baseball stadium. That took all day. That Commissioner's Court meeting ended at 6 p.m. So they were hours and hours.
And they started at like 9 a.m.
Yes.
And this is the Missions Baseball Stadium on the northwest corner of downtown. What is it that the county was being asked to do?
They were going to be signing a memorandum of understanding to go forward with the funding discussions.
Yeah, so the public funding, both from the city and county, through kind of funneled through what's known as the Houston Street Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone, which you've got representation from the city and county on that zone's board. That money is going to pay for most of this $160 million baseball stadium. That's kind of that was what that vote was about. What was Tommy's reason for not taking a vote?
Well, I mean, it was mainly, he represents the east side, and that's where the Frost Center is currently. And, you know, that there was an implicit promise years ago whenever that was built that it would bring development and like economic opportunity to a very underdeveloped area of the east side. That promise never kind of came to fruition. And that was kind of another big argument that the developers of the Missions Baseball Stadium was saying about moving the baseball stadium to downtown. It would revitalize downtown.
So Commissioner Calvert was worried about the example of Frost Bank Center and kind of the disappointment on the east side. Okay.
And so he was dubious when the developers were saying, you know, if we move this Missions Baseball stadium to downtown, it's going to revitalize an area of downtown that's kind of sleepy.
Got it.
Commissioner Calvert and a lot of his constituents kind of like doubt whether or not this is actually going to happen because they've been scorned previously under a very similar promise. You know, and so he abstained, kind of basically saying that my East Side constituents just cannot, even though the baseball stadium would be outside of his precinct, it's in Commissioner Rodriguez's precinct right now, where they currently are at the Nelson Wolf Stadium, and then it would be moved downtown. He said that his constituents just didn't agree, but he wanted to give deference to Commissioner Rodriguez because it's kind of a project in his precinct, so he was going to abstain. That was a huge vote, and you know, he also abstained from another very controversial vote that drew a lawsuit from the Texas AG Ken Paxton. This was about CGS, which was ahead of the election. Bexar County wanted to spend about $40,000. That got, through the course of the campaign, got moved down to about half the amount. But at the time, they wanted to spend about $40,000 to pay a company called Civic Government Solutions to send out voter registration forms to eligible but unregistered voters within Bexar County. This brought a lot of Republican pushback. We had Chris Coons, the new head of the Republican Bexar County group at Commissioner's Court, with her vice kind of complaining and saying that this could potentially be targeting voters who are not eligible to vote. And it would be spinning the election towards Democrats, because Bexar County is just a generally very blue jurisdiction, and that encouraging voting would, you know, encourage blue votes. And so That was another one that Commissioner Calvolt, who previously, when this came to Commissioner's Court in the summer, had said yes. He was like, ideally, in a democracy, you want everyone to vote. This just makes sense. So he voted yes when this first came to the court. But by the second time, you had a threat of a lawsuit by Ken Paxton. You had scores of local Republicans pushing back on this. You had people accusing the owner of CGS for past partisan comments he's made about how if Democrats want to win elections, they have to increase voter turnout. And based on all that information, Commissioner Calvolt was like, it doesn't pass the smell test. I'm going to abstain. And then the third biggest vote he abstained from was the VIA line, the green line that would run east to west through downtown, which I would actually be going through part of Calvolt's precincts. Bexar County needs to kick in about $100 million to unlock a bunch more money from a federal grant. And Calvolt abstained from that one and actually didn't explain. We have no idea.
Right. So you looked at that, and it kind of got you thinking about abstentions, and you took a pretty long view. I mean, you looked at every county commissioner and the number of abstentions they racked up over about a 1 year period, remembering correctly.
14 months.
14 months.
Yes.
Through September or October
of this year? Yeah. No, it was through like November.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So how did Tommy Calvert stack up in terms of the number of abstentions?
In terms of the number, he was the second highest. Mm-hmm. He, in the course of the 14 months, he abstained 10 times. By far, the winner of the person who has done the most abstentions is Precinct 3 Commissioner.
The abstention champion. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
okay.
The king. Grant Moody. In the space of 14 months, he abstained 30 times, 30, which is an impressive amount considering Commissioner's Court meets about 2 times a month. And it was almost every single convening of Commissioner's Court he would abstain from one item. I think there was maybe like 5 or 6 meetings where he did not abstain from something. And, he abstains from obviously a lot of things, but, I think one of the most interesting things he abstained from are some of these kind of policy decisions he's campaigned on since the very beginning. Like, Moody is the lone Republican on the 5-member Commissioner's Court. And like, many conservative Republicans will back, he is comes out against affordable housing initiatives. Like, he often uses the line that he believes that affordable housing, quote unquote, is cannibalizing market rate housing. So he has a very strong position on this. But many of the abstentions he has made were on affordable housing initiatives. And, that is something that his predecessor, Kevin Wolf, who was the Precinct 3 Commissioner for 12 years prior to Moody, kind of pointed out. He was like, on controversial items, which includes affordable housing, you should be able to make a distinct, clear vote, whether you support it or you don't, based off what your constituents think. And Wolf was very critical of the abstentions because, he thinks that if you're abstaining, that is kind of riding the fence, not making a decision. It's a way of politically hiding. Moody will obviously come and contest that, saying that, abstentions, he is making a point by an abstention. The major point I think he would point to is that he believes that county staff often don't give him enough information to make a fully informed vote. So for example, on one of the affordable housing complexes, the Ozo Apartments, that came before Commissioner's Court, and Moody was asking staffers to give him information on the area median incomes that had the most demand and whether or not these apartments were in line with the demand of the AMIs. County staff wasn't able to give him that information. So these were kind of the things that he would point to say, like, I need to have this information if I want to make a yes or no vote. But at the same time, that same example of Ozo Apartments came before the court 3 months later for final approval. And in that case, he abstained again for the affordable housing initiative. So
I think he would also say, I've taken millions of votes.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that was part of his argument, was it not? That it's like, yeah, I've abstained 30 times, but we've taken, hundreds, thousands of votes. Do we have
That's true. That's true. But most of those votes are coming off the consent agenda, which is like probably like 80% roughly of any commissioner's court agenda is the consent agenda, which is just a list of non-controversial measures that like the commissioners will all just typically vote yes on in one sweep. I think the interesting thing about that though is on several of these abstentions, he will pick out measures from the consent agenda and then abstain without explanation.
Okay.
But yes, there has been several votes. He also has voted no on some significant votes, like the VIA line. He voted no because he was concerned about whether or not San Antonio is fully utilizing the bus system as it is now. And he also voted no for CGS. So yes, he does vote no on some of these controversial items.
A lot of abstaining, though.
A lot of abstaining, yeah.
So, I think we can safely just leave it there. I think that's a lot of abstentions. To shift back just quickly to City Hall, I've got my own personal favorite. This is one of the more fun controversies that we had in 2024. Came in August in a city council debate in which Manny Pelaez, District 8 councilman, now running for mayor, he had come out against sending a charter amendment to San Antonio voters to approve that would raise city council pay. He said, we don't need a pay raise. Several of his colleagues pointed out that, yeah, you're a lawyer. You're one of three on council, the others being Mark White and Melissa Haverda. And it's kind of easy for lawyers to work around the council schedule. You can fit in legal work in the evenings, on the weekends, that kind of thing.
A lot of difference from Key Rodriguez, who was a teacher at the time. And
that's right. Yeah. So
leave that behind.
Exactly. Yeah. So it very quickly became, it was almost like class warfare had broken out on the dais that day in August. The controversy is Manny Pelaez's reaction to it, his response to his colleagues saying that not everybody was a lawyer who could, make a ton of money on your off hours. His response was, I will tell you that city council, with all this talk of service and humility and all that, is the closest thing to royalty in San Antonio that you can get. We all get great parking spaces, folks. We get to park wherever the hell we want to. All of us get invited to every Spurs game and all the high ticket concerts. And by the way, those of us up here who talk about regular ass people and regular folks and being poverty pimps and all that stuff, you'll see they're all in the suites, at the luxury suites, at the luxury events and galas, right? Several of his colleagues said, no, that's not right. They did not. They don't go to these luxury galas. They aren't. You won't find them in Spurs luxury boxes. He is right, though, that a lot of city council members do. But by the way, it is worth noting there are some restrictions. The city council members, it turns out, cannot park wherever the hell they want. They can park free in city-owned parking garages, and
which are some of the cheapest lots that you can get in town.
Yeah, it's like these aren't super expensive surface lots or anything like that. And the San Antonio Police Department does issue parking permits for city council members who are on official council business. My guess is that probably gets abused quite a bit, that particular permit. And you can't just accept gifts willy-nilly. I think there's $50 limit, but you also can't accept gifts from parties that have business before council. So I thought that was totally worth remembering when we're talking about controversy.
Yeah, he got a lot of blowback for that comment for sure.
A ton. Yeah, and he had this great. I was trying to find this meme he sent around. He sent it around to a lot of his contacts. It really made the rounds at City Hall. It was he drives a Toyota Tundra. It was a picture of his Tundra parked on top of the Tower of the Americas. It was a great thing. I wish I could have found it. That would have been fantastic. My other big controversy of the year would have been was City Council agreeing to this public financing scheme for the Missions baseball stadium. The thing about the construction of this going to be 4,500 seat baseball stadium is that it is tied completely to development at Weston Urban, whose principals are part owners of the Missions, that they're on the hook for. So if they don't do a lot of private development around the stadium doesn't get done. So they have 2 phases of development that must be planned, financed, and ready to go before the city and county will sell bonds to build the stadium. Part of that property where you're going to see this private development is the Soapworks Soap Factory Apartments complex, which Weston Urban owns. They're going to move families out of that complex and raise it to make way for private development, such as a hotel, retail, maybe some office, that kind of thing, and not affordable housing. Soap Factory It's not in a formal sense affordable housing, but it is one of the cheaper housing options in the downtown area. And downtown is not a cheap place to live, and a lot of families whose parents work in the service sector, they have apartments at Soap Factory. So the city council agreed to this funding plan, knowing that it was going to result in the closing of Soap Factory. They did so in violation of the tax increment financing policy that the city council itself adopted. It says you cannot use a TERS to help facilitate the closing of or the destruction of housing.
I think Councilwoman Terry Castillo was really the only one, if I'm remembering correctly, who really called them out for it. Right?
That's right. Yeah. And it wasn't only the TIF policy, but the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan. This was Mayor Ron Nirenberg's. He championed this for years. Same thing. The city cannot or should not. That's really the rub, should not engage in a project that's going to result in people losing their housing. And the city council did it anyway. So that, to me, for my 2 cents, is one of the big controversies of the year.
Can you remind me what their logic was of why they were
their logic was that it's like, look, we're talking about, the TERS is going to be financing kind of indirectly the baseball stadium. So this has nothing to do with housing. This is property that's mostly vacant now. And it's not the Soap Factory property. So it's okay for us to do what we're doing, which is the disingenuous part is that city council and city staff was very clear that this this financing of a baseball stadium would not happen without the destruction of Soap Factory. So, it was, I think I wrote a column in which I called it weasel wording. I'm going to stand by that. It was, but a little more prosaic. Let's move into city departments. We had kind of a shakeup at Animal Care Services. Let's hear a little bit.
Yes, yeah, Animal Care Services. There was the former director, Shannon Sims. He ended up stepping down from his role at the end of May, which is a little bit earlier than he'd said. He originally told me that he was planning on leaving in June and even had plans to potentially stay longer. He said he was leaving for personal reasons, just wanted to prioritize family life. And he, not really because of all the kind of problems that ACS was having, so he was claiming that it was all personal reasons. But he's had this, when he was talking about it initially, he talked about it as this commitment still to the department of, like I said, wanting to maybe even help the next person transition into the role. But ultimately, yeah, he leaves even earlier than his actual end date. He had called a bunch of the local animal welfare activists social media terrorists in his farewell speech to the ACS advisory board, and a week later he was gone. And so, he left
it was about a month earlier than he was supposed to.
It was actually it depends again how you kind of look at it, because that was how he originally said he was going to leave in June, and then a spokesperson, though, because he was not speaking at this point when he was actually departing, said that he was retired to schedule on May 31st, but that he was just using up some of his last little bit of saved up leave to go. So it's kind of depends how you look at when he was planning to leave, what the length of time was.
Why was he calling the animal rights activists social media terrorists?
Yeah, so there's a lot of folks who send in tons of open records requests into largely a lot of different departments in the city, but Animal Care Services tends to be the target of a lot of these. And he was kind of talking about them in his farewell thing, saying that that's just kind of gunking up the work and that they're trying to do, and slowing them down as they're trying to go through these mountains of records when they're they're not reporters, but he was kind of calling them gotcha journalists type of a thing, with the amount of digging that they're trying to do, and that he was basically just saying that they weren't helping the matter. But yeah, so that was the kind of background to that. But yeah, he ends up after he leaves, it was kind of in a hurry. And so the assistant city manager, David McCary, who oversees ACS, stepped into the role of interim position for a short while. And then right away, we see development services director, Mike Shannon, take over though. And he's been leading it for a bit now. And so he will be stepping out though very soon because we've got a new person coming in. It's going to be a man from Oklahoma who will be taking over, Jonathan Gary. He spent the last 25 years in the Oklahoma City Animal Welfare Division. He was director for the past 8 years, almost a decade. He's going to be kind of taking the reins now. But yeah, the hiring took a bit though. So, because like I said, it was from May, and then we had those interims and everything. But hiring was also interesting because it kind of shut down and then reopened. City manager Eric Walsh, he had out of the pool of 70 people that they'd gotten, they had narrowed it down to just a handful of people, and he was doing the final interviews, and Eric Walsh has the final say on who gets hired for these positions. He ended up saying that he was dissatisfied with who they got and reopened it, and that's when we see the Jonathan Gary kind of come in. But some of the people who were a part of that application pool originally that got turned down include some of the people who were still working at ACS. Shannon Oster Gabrielson, who's the assistant director for ACS, or assistant to the director of ACS. And then also the ACS chief operations officer, Bethany Colonies, were a couple of the people. And then there was people from all over, because this was a national search.
Do we know why Eric Walsh didn't want the in-house people?
Well, yeah, he wouldn't comment specifically on why he turned down specific people. The most he would really say was just that he, out of all of them, not even just the in-house, but everyone, that he just just felt like he needed like a stronger candidate. I think he told our editorial board at one point also that like, oh, this job is as hard or harder than sometimes like the police chief's job. Like we need somebody in there who's like really strong. And so he just wanted a stronger candidate. And again, like he never actually commented directly on the people they rejected. The people they rejected, I only know their names because of open records requests that I've made to see like all the applicant pools. He was never like commenting directly on anyone in particular when he was making these remarks to us. He wouldn't talk directly about each person, but yeah. So the department is interesting. Like this new guy has a lot cut out for him right now. Basically, ACS has been heavily criticized for a while now because there's been a string of like really brutal dog maulings, right, and
resulting in
deadly
deaths.
Yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. And so that kind of led the city last year to reevaluate ACS and start questioning them during the budget cycle of like, what is going on with ACS? And they found that ACS was only responding to 44% of their critical calls. Those are things like with really aggressive dogs, animal neglect, things like that, like the really severe cases. Only 40% of those calls were even getting responded to. A lot was going completely ignored. And so they are actually now up to 64% with the new staffers that they've brought on to kind of keep looking into these issues. And they want to get to 100% by 2026. So they've got a little ways to go.
All right. So last big controversy of the year started out, this was very early in 2024. It was January 3rd. We learned that Fire Chief Charles Hood was going to retire. Turns out he was forced to retire. Given that he had a pretty lengthy history of making super sexist comments, some racially insensitive comments, and city investigation found a good deal of them, and he was forced to step aside. He had been with the city
since 2007.
yeah.
Or actually, no, sorry, that was like his chief. Even before that was like his term was like running. Yes.
Right. So that kind of threw the fire department in chaos, and pick it up from there because it's continued to be chaotic.
Yes, it didn't get any calmer after he left. Basically, there was a big search for a new hire, and there ended up being 65 applicants nationwide. They ended up going actually with Valerie Frausto, though, who is one of San Antonio's own. She had been at the department for a couple of decades at this point, and she had to go through a lot, though, to be hired. She was blackmailed during her application process. Chris Steele, who was a former fire union president, was blackmailing her and other employees who he thought might be applying. I think some of which didn't actually didn't really know why they were getting these messages from him. But yeah, he was like threatening to release personal information if they applied. She kind of brushed it all off, like in interviews after the fact when she was hired. Basically saying that it was kind of a non-issue for her. And yeah, she's the first woman fire chief that the city of San Antonio has. Yeah.
And I think she didn't she go to police? I think she went to San Antonio police.
Yes, there were.
So I mean, she didn't submit to the blackmail.
You're correct.
And these are allegations against Chris Steele. He's under criminal indictment for this. So we'll see how that case plays out. But yeah, I mean, so he is accused of assuming an alternate personality. He presented himself as a private detective. Don't have the name's not coming to me. It might be Frank, which is a good private detective name. Anyway, so kind of weird and unfortunate that San Antonio's first female fire chief had to go through such a weird scenario, but there you have it.
Yeah, she started on November 1st, and yeah, I see her around City Hall now.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll call it a day on that. We'll call it a year. We are going to be back January 6th. We're taking next week off, and on the 6th, we'll be talking about the year ahead. So thank you very much, and we will see you then.